Hey, everybody.
Thanks for tuning in to the Hanging On to Hope podcast.
I'm Brenda J.
And I'm Karen Wonder.
And we are hangingontohope.org.
This podcast is intended as educational and is not psychological or medical advice. Always consult a professional when needed, and we disclaim any liability in connection with the instruction, information, or advice given.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Hanging On to Hope podcast. This is Brenda J. Today, we brought Andrew Bauman back to the podcast to cover two of his other books, Stumbling Towards Wholeness and How Not to Be an Ass. Andrew is a Christian author, therapist, and abuse advocate. He also helps men become sexually healthy and runs the Christian Counseling Center for Sexual Health and Trauma. So welcome back to the show, Andrew.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. Glad to be back.
Awesome.
Yes. So this is Karen. So first we're going to cover Stumbling Towards Wholeness. And I just got to say, I love this book. I love your new one too, How Not to Be an Ass. That was so validating. But if we're going to go over on this podcast is Stumbling Towards Wholeness. Brenda and I both read this book early on in our healing journey, and I took pages and pages of notes. And even just going through this to write up the questions, it's just such good material because obviously these are things I struggle with, the shame and all that, but it's so healing. So we both loved it. So can you start out by telling our audience a little of the background on how it led up to writing this book?
Yeah. This book, most all my books are basically for selfish reasons. They're for myself, but basically I was having a hard time in my private practice languaging kind of the theology, making the bridge between the theology and the psychology. So my clients come in and are looking for healing, and maybe they're very theologically minded. I needed to bridge that gap. And so as I began diving more into the story through Henry Nouwen's work, The Return of the Prodigal, it started kind of coming to me of, this would make more sense if we put it in kind of these psychological categories for people. And so basically turning that story into here is the roadmap for healing. Here's the roadmap for wholeness. Here's how God's love actually can change us and transform us. And so that's where that came from, was to help me be a better therapist and help me kind of bridge that gap for folks.
Yeah.
I love that.
And that's what makes it so powerful, is you are, identifying with each character in that story, but applying it to yourself. So that's awesome.
Yeah. And I'm very practical. I like the guide. It helped me so much. When you're first to come out of an abusive relationship, my brain really didn't work well for a long time.
Right.
And so it was very helpful, that book, just the simple things that I did. Now, you start the book with a synopsis of Luke 15:11 through 32, the parable of the prodigal son. For those who aren't familiar with it, would you like to briefly tell our listeners about this parable and expound on what it means to you and why we can all relate to each character?
Definitely. So the story of the prodigal son, grew up hearing it. Basically, son runs away, asks for a third of the father's estate, takes a third of it, squanders it all, then comes back and basically asks to be the slave to try to work it off. The elder brother's not happy because he's been working. And so that's basically the gist of it. And so what I propose in the book is that the story of the prodigal is the story of us all. And it's not just the prodigal son, because that's, in a sense, easy to identify with. We're all sinners. That's what I grew up hearing in my Southern Baptist church. But what I didn't really hear is that I'm also the elder brother. I'm also judgmental, also a bit of an ass. And I'm also the father, right? Not that I'm God, but that God is in me. And that's the goal, is can we begin to embody the father's voice? And the father treats both the younger son and the elder son with the same wild compassion and grace that I want to treat myself with. And so basically then bringing it personal, if I am each character, how do I embody each character? How do I live out each character? And then the goal of being more and more like the Father.
Yes, absolutely.
Continuing with part 2 of Stumbling Towards Wholeness. Yeah.
And then we say we teach people how to treat us. So like you're saying, if we're not seeing being truly humble, then that's going to affect how people treat us.
Mm.
So to begin transformation in the sun realm, we must see that holding on to shame, addiction, and self-contempt is an attempt to heal something broken inside ourselves. Yet our actions to mend what is broken are misguided, hurt the people we love, and make our souls more fragmented. Our resulting desperation exposes our need for God and for his embrace. And I love this quote from Dan Allender. He says, "A healing path must pass through the desert, or else our healing will be the product of our own will and wisdom. It is in the silence of the desert that we hear our dependence on the noise.
Yes.
It is in the poverty of the desert that we clearly see our attachments to the trinkets and baubles we cling to for security and pleasure. The desert shatters the soul's arrogance and leaves the body and the soul crying out in thirst and hunger. In the desert, we trust God or we die." Can you explain, I know we've shared this a little bit, but can you explain why we unconsciously run from goodness and wrestle with sabotage?
Yes. We are truly terrified of our goodness. We're terrified because I remember I'm leading a conference with Dan Allender. We're flying down to California, right? So it's this like feeling all important. We're traveling down, doing God's work, leading these groups, talking about the depths of life. And I'm counseling this group like 8 hours in one day. And I'm just like feeling pumped. It's just this deep soul work, battling good and evil. So we're done with the day. And I just remember feeling so pumped up of like, gosh, I can't believe I'm getting to travel with this group of amazing therapists. And we're doing this crazy work. And I remember afterwards feeling this big feeling of wanting to look at porn and masturbate. And I hadn't done it in years at that point. And I was like, this is so weird. And so I processed, okay, why am I feeling this? And it was because I felt so much goodness and I couldn't bear it. I wanted to sabotage it. In a sense, I wanted to destroy it because I knew it wasn't going to last. I knew that feeling like I just could not bear that goodness. And that's the only way I can answer that is how do you bear goodness well? How do you hold it? And it's so difficult to bear goodness well, to actually delight in it without wanting to sabotage it, because goodness and hope are terrifying.
Yeah. And we can be our own worst enemies a lot of times.
Wow. That's just powerful. Yeah, I'm going to read that again too, because this is powerful too. The desert shatters the soul's arrogance and leaves the body and the soul crying out in thirst and hunger. This has been like such a soul healing journey for me over the last, since the podcast started. So I love all this. Your book has been so healing for me.
So good to hear.
Yeah. In the book, you give a beautiful example of surrendering to love, but say this is the only way to experience true love. Can you share your example of the bird from the book?
Yeah. So basically the idea of love as a little bird. And so we so desperately long for love. And so we keep the bird in our hand and we hold it kind of loosely, right? So imagine both your hands, loosely gripping this bird, and it's not flying away and it's not dying. So that's good, but it's not free. And so the other way we hold on to love is we clam our hands together and we kill it. We try to control it. That's not love either. So genuine love is, I believe, an open-handed posture of surrender. But then the bird can fly away. And you're right. Like it can. It actually has freedom. But that's when you know it's genuine love, when it flies back and it chooses you, even though it has freedom to fly away. And that's, I think, the healthiest relationships, when we give our partners true freedom to say, yeah, of course you can leave. I don't want you to, but both of you have that freedom to be free, to be yourself and to choose the person you want to be with.
Yeah. Not to remain with someone that doesn't want to see you in that healthy way.
Yeah. That freedom is just amazing to have in it. It's wonderful. And I just feel like I trust myself. So I don't understand why in a relationship, someone wouldn't give me that freedom.
Yeah.
It's probably, they don't give it to you because they don't trust themselves.
Yep. Because they're wildly insecure, right? They're wildly unhealed, and it's easier to control you than to try to deal with themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. But I haven't experienced that. That'll be so exciting to experience that freedom and true unconditional love someday. But I have it from God, so I'm good.
So you talk about the elder son in the parable and relate it to us. You say that the posture of expecting God's favor without confronting our obstacles to right relationship with him and others marks many of our restoration journeys. We cannot taste resurrection until we have drunk deeply from the cup of suffering. I love that line. The elder brother wanted the gifts of the father without accepting the cost of remaining in relationship. Our work is to let suffering arise and enrich our lives rather than resist it. Can you expound on this elder brother's sense of entitlement, which we all do have, like you said, and how it keeps us isolated from relationships and God? And then how do we confront our self-righteousness and lean towards mercy and humility?
Yes. And so an easy way to say this is the elder brother's realm, and what I say in the book, is motivated by duty rather than desire, right? Not living from the heart. It's a performance-based gospel that gives us the illusion of control. This is where we have to face our entitlement, our harsh judgment, contempt, self-righteousness that makes us feel powerful. Mm-hmm. The similar journey to that of the son realm who's wrestling with addiction, it's escaping pain, but just in a different way.
Yeah.
Right? It's just different way. It actually looks more, this is the realm of the Pharisees. And actually studying for writing this book, I came to realize Jesus told this story not because of the prodigal. He actually told this story to a group of Pharisees. I actually think the main reason he told the story was because of the elder, not because to tell us about our sin.
Yeah.
But it was actually to expose the Pharisees that they were the elder brother operating out of duty rather than desire.
Yeah. And you miss out on so much. I mean, that's how I kind of see the homeschool thing partly too, because it's so much about, that how things look. It's not genuine. And I just remember looking down almost like, oh, we homeschool. Like that was so much better. There's just so much I regret. Not that homeschooling in itself is bad, but it's just, there's so much of that culture that's the legalism that's kind of intertwined with it that now I can just look back and see so much damage from it. So I constantly apologizing to my kids, like, I'm sorry I taught that, That's all you can do. It's like, yeah, well, I know better now.
Right.
Well, love your neighbor as yourself is written 8 times in the New American Standard Bible. We cannot truly love our neighbors until we develop a healthy love for ourselves. Just like entitlement, contempt for others guards what is really going on inside our hearts and gives us a false sense of control. Vulnerability and intimacy can be terrifying proposals, so we use others-centered contempt to shield ourselves from the risk. Can you explain this to our listeners?
Yes. Basically, we love ourselves to the level in which we love others. Now, sometimes we can treat others better than ourselves, but it's not genuine love. And so truly, if you can love yourself well, I truly believe you can love others in a much deeper way that looks a lot more like God's love, not just looking good or, back to the performance-based self-righteousness love, but actually genuine love that's not rooted in insecurity. That's not rooted in, if I love you, then you'll love me.
Yeah.
Right? It's not agenda driven.
Yeah, it's just that genuine love. And the elder brother also represents our own inner Pharisee, like you had said. When we are committed to seeking justice over mercy, having correct theology over caring for those we disagree with, then a self-righteous, unyielding posture creates distance and abandonment for all involved. The elder brother was faithful, but so committed to being perfect and earning his father's approval that he didn't know the glory of being chosen and loved. How can we seek to be more balanced in this?
Yeah. I think when you love yourself well, when you can embody God's love, I truly believe we don't become the elder brother. We don't judge others. When we see ourselves clearly through the way God sees us, we can tell the truth about our goodness and our depravity. We don't think of ourselves too highly because I know my sin, right? And I don't think of myself too lowly because I know my goodness. I know how God sees me. And so that balanced approach truly changes us. And that's where, back to the father realm, when we can begin to befriend grief and enter into grief and begin to feel, I think then we don't become like this, the younger or the elder. Right? When we actually begin to feel and actually begin to extend the kindness to our stories, to our grief, we surrender control and we no longer look like either of them, but we look much more like God.
That's good.
So you talk about forgiveness being used as a weapon of shame rather than a tool for freedom. Before we can forgive from the heart, we must honor our pain and rage against injustice. Forgiveness is not neglecting or forgetting what we feel, but fully embracing and exploring it, courageously addressing whatever is there. Like us, forgiveness has a heartbeat. It's not something we do in our heads. Forgiveness is about true surrender and may feel like death. I was under the misconception that to forgive was to forget. How can we wrap our heads around this concept of forgiveness?
Yeah, I truly believe it's a verb. It's an ongoing thing, right? Whereas this almost like, I forgave you, it's over. Like, that's not how I operate. Maybe other people are more holy than me, but I know for me, it's like I have to continue to lean into forgiveness. I have to continue. It has to be an action, and it truly helps if, let's say I'm in my marriage, that Christy, if she hurts me and I tell her and she doesn't keep doing it, like, it really helps my effort to forgive when she actually loves me well. And yet at the end of the day, I do need to forgive. It does not mean that I need to be in a relationship if it's an abusive situation or something like that. Forgiveness does not mean reconciliation, but it does mean setting myself free from their power over me.
Right. Yeah, that's a key point. Forgiveness is not reconciliation. And the Father's heart was filled with love and compassion, which is also compatible with grief. Because the Father loves the Son so deeply, the Father must grieve to the same level of love. The Father realm always calls us to live in a paradoxical tension between love and heartache, and glory and pain. The idea of turning suffering into glory is the essence of the good news of the gospel. But the Father and the Sons could not share in the glory of restored relationship without being willing to suffer heartache and grief. Grief and glory are always bound together in a particular dance. The temptation will be to try to resist your crucifixion. Why is it important not to do this when it comes to healing?
Yeah. There's no resurrection without crucifixion. And so we have to follow in the footsteps. We have to follow in the footsteps of Christ. And so how do you do that? We have to engage in our own crucifixion and our own death. And that's the stories of shame. That's the stories of sexual abuse. That's the stories of betrayal. It's the stories of trauma, both, small T and big T traumas in your life. And when you can enter into those stories, I truly believe we can taste the resurrection that God has for us.
Yes, absolutely.
The Father opens his heart to wounding and transgression and is willing to let his heart break. And Father models a posture of vulnerability and courage made possible by his willingness to fully enter suffering and loss. This creates the possibility for restoration to occur in his Son's life. Grief and joy are related. If we face our grief, we can find ourselves in the Father realm. In the Father realm, we must allow our hearts to break and then have the courage to love ourselves and others despite the broken pieces. Though our choices to face our own death stories will not bring the possibility of salvation for an entire world, they will help set others free and must be fought for. You then talk about welcoming silence. We are sometimes forced into the silence of ourselves so we can figure out who we want to be and then finally inviting others along. This was huge for me. Did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, it's just that idea that the deeper we grieve is the deeper we joy. And so to live in the tension of the death and resurrection, to hold both simultaneously, that's the goal of I believe, of an authentic Christian life. And so can you do that? Can you hold the tension of both? Live in the middle of death and resurrection. And I don't know if you've met those Christians that are all resurrection and God is good all the time. Amen. It's just like, so annoying, stop it. And yet all death is not true either. And so what does it mean to know that it's both? It's not all death and it's not all resurrection, but it's the tension of both.
Yes, very well said.
Yes.
And change always involves stumbling and failing and therefore requires immense kindness and grace. If we have no compassion for ourselves, we simply cannot muster the energy needed to get back up and keep going. Kindness to self is a lost art in Christendom. Yet without it, we become stuck in the early part of the restoration journey. Without love, we cannot be kind. Experiencing kindness means entering pain and grief and accepting it as part of the journey towards transformation. So how do we begin our journey towards kindness and keep ourselves from resistance, which is what flesh wants to do?
Yes, yes. And that goes back to that, what we talked about earlier of blessing our bodies, diving into the old stories that have caused you shame and pain, and beginning to truly live out the love of God and how you treat yourself. Radical kindness towards yourself, towards your failures, no longer judging yourself. Can you do that? Can you invite yourself to the party? Remember, the father in the story of the prodigal, he invited the younger and the elder to the party, right? He doesn't pick and choose. There's unconditional love to the shame, to the entitlement, judgment, contempt. He extends grace to all. And we can do that as well. We can embody God's love for us.
Yeah. And I think for me, because my relationship, I felt so much condemnation because it was just that criticalness. So when you're in that kind of a relationship, it's just easy to, I don't know, because I know my own, I'm very hard on myself. And so then when someone points out a criticism or is critical, it's just easy, unless you're having the self-awareness, to pull back and say, that's not humility. Humility is not just beating yourself up and, not seeing any good, like you're saying.
Yeah, I've healed so much, and I found myself the other day going back to criticizing myself again. And Karen's like, that's not true. And I'm like, I know, but I'm going down that path. Like, we stopped before it happened, but it was kind of funny because I knew it was wrong too, and I still did it.
Yeah.
What am I doing here?
It becomes almost like second nature when we've done it a lot.
Yeah.
It takes time to unlearn a way of being that we've learned so well.
Yeah, it's a habit.
Definitely. Resurrection means you have triumphed over death. The resurrection party is for those who have suffered immense heartache and are willing to show their scars. Resurrection isn't a reward, it's a grace. God is truth, and the more we live in truth, the more we experience God. We need to own our truth. Living a hidden life always costs more than living authentically. Can you expound and explain the reward for living in truth?
Yeah, I think the most simple way is God. We get God. We get to access and experience God when we can truly live in truth, tell the truth of our stories, all the good, bad, and the ugly, and the beautiful. Like that, I believe, is a doorway into knowing God more fully.
Yeah,
great.
So we wanted to wrap up by giving some practical ways to help you stay tethered to the resurrected life, which we all need. When we're able to step into the Father realm and into our core goodness, we're able to celebrate and party with a wild hilarity few understand. Freedom and surrender are not normal, so others may not comprehend. This is the resurrected life we were created for. Can you talk about loosening your grip and becoming a new creation?
Yeah, and I see that in your posts. You seem like you've loosened your grip.
Yeah. I've worked hard, right, to do that. And that's the fact of like no longer trying to control, truly loosening, like rather than in a sense, I know it all, or this is my, like, I think the older I get, the more I learn, the more I know God, the less I know God, right? Yeah. The more I practice reading and learning, it's like, no, the less I actually know.
Yeah.
The more I learn or the more I grow, the actually less gripping that I know the right way. Realizing God is so much bigger than I can comprehend. I think that's creating, again, that deeper humility that I don't know. All I can do is try my best to speak to the world as I see it and as I've experienced it. And that's just my experience. And some people are going to connect with it and others aren't.
Yeah. And you can't worry about it. You just got to do what God's calling you to do.
Exactly.
Our healing comes through an attempt to heal our woundedness. We become hungry and attempt to get our fill. Eventually, we become tired of our gluttonous ways. And in our self-reflection, we begin the slow, painful dying to self. It can be an agonizing demise of letting go of the things that have brought us comfort and peace, but have blocked our ability to heal. This is the part of the healing process. We become scared of our own goodness and glory, just like you said earlier. Mm-hmm. Here we must keep our eyes on the glorious resurrection after the required season of crucifixion. In this death, we become pulp while creating the nourishing attributes that we need to become who God has always known we are. This is the aching beauty of a healing change. As we get used to our newfound beauty, we begin to exist differently in our world. Likewise, we become new. not because pain is absent, but because we have peace with its presence. We have more authenticity, more confidence, more sorrow, and more joy. We experience the rootedness of knowing who we are. This is the beautiful mess of how we change. Because of God within us, transformative healing is not only possible, but also attainable. Wholeness is offered freely to us, but it is not guaranteed. Thank you so much for writing this book, Andrew.
Yes, thank you. I'm so glad it meant a lot to both of you. It is my favorite book that I wrote, and took 3 years to write it. And I'm glad that you guys enjoyed it, and I hope more people will read it.
Yeah, it's one of those books, like I said, I had read it quite a while ago, but going through and just being reminded of it, I'm like, yeah, this is a book that I need to just continually read.
Yeah,
I'm so prone to condemnation of myself.
I think I mentioned on another podcast, and people have asked about it, but I'm sure after this podcast, and a lot of our listeners are right in the middle of healing and going through some stuff. So it's going to be very, very helpful to them. Okay.
Yeah, this is kind of just my book for the general, what does general healing look like? Mm-hmm. I've got my book on sexuality and pornography and abuse, but this is more just kind of the general healing.
Yeah. Which anyone that struggles with self-condemnation that would get healing from or shame. So where can our listeners buy your books and learn about all your resources and like your counseling?
Yeah. So everything's on, Amazon, obviously the books, and to my wife and I think we got like eight books so far, and working on some other ones in the oven. But you can find us at www.christiancc.org. And we run the Christian Counseling Center for Sexual Health and Trauma. And we've got a group of affiliate counselors that work weekly with folks. And then my wife and I just do intensives, and people fly in. And we just do a lot of deep work. We do groups as well. And
are you located in North Carolina? Is that where you are?
Yeah. So we just moved. We are building our West Coast center. We were in Seattle for 15 years, and now we're full-time East Coast. And then we're building our West Coast site as well. And that will be ready hopefully within the year.
That's great.
Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast. And we just really, really appreciate you. And thanks for taking the time with us today.
Thank you.
All right. Take care.
Thanks for tuning in to Hanging On to Hope. Check out our website, hangingontohope.org. There are resources on there, and if you would like to donate or volunteer, you can do that through our website. We are a brand new nonprofit, so we appreciate any and all support. And we thank you for listening, and until next time, keep hanging on to hope. We are evidence that there is hope and healing for you, and our passion is to help you find it too. So thanks for tuning in.
Thanks for listening, everyone.